The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferens.
Sweden's largest union calls off its strike against Tesla, a strike that went over 1,000 days. So what happened and why? Today on the show, the importance of peer-to-peer resources in the building trades. Welcome to the Thursday, August 20th edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. Well, it's Trades Day here on America's Workforce, and our featured guest, who we had on the show not too long ago, is Bill McCamley. Now, Bill has more than 20 years in public life as a county commissioner, a state rep, also Secretary of Labor for New Mexico. Right now, he is the director of the New Mexico Building Trades Wellness Coalition, and that would be nmbtwellness.org. We've done a lot of shows here on America's Workforce about the importance of being safe mentally and physically. Well, today we're going to concentrate on men's mental health. Did you know 95% of construction trades workers are men, and suicide is the 8th leading cause of all death for men. Number 2 for those between the ages of 25 and 34 years old. You can also throw vets in there as well. 70% of opioid overdoses are men. 40% of men admit to be in depression. 44% admit to thinking about suicide in the past week. So what's going on here? We need to do something. There's a lot of resources, and the big problem is connecting men with the proper resources. The importance of peer-to-peer resources, especially in the trades. And I'll tell you, Bill knows this all too well. You might want to check out his book, Right My Dudes, Now What?, which brings a public experience to a deeply personal question. How can men find the real answers to the burdens they carry? And he has his own website here, too. It's billmccamley.net, and you could check out the book there and perhaps order it. And when you're done reading it, give it to somebody else. And that person could give it to somebody else. So he's going to be our featured guest here on America's Workforce on Trades Day. Now, a brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. You can find more at boydwatterson.com. Sweden's largest union, IF Metall, has called off its strike against Tesla after 1,021 days, the longest labor conflict in modern Swedish history. The union says it's stopping because Tesla bought out every one of its striking members, leaving the walkout with nothing left to withhold. Now, this all began in October of 2023. We covered this on the show. It began then over a single demand that Tesla sign a Swedish collective bargaining agreement for its mechanics. Well, nearly 3 years later, Tesla still hasn't signed one, and now the union is standing down. IF Metall announced that it is ending all conflict measures against Tesla. In a statement, the union says it was blunt about why Tesla bought out its members at the company. So the strike no longer has any effect. We're talking about 120 mechanics. October 27, 2003, that's when the fight began, across 7 Swedish workshops. They walked off after Tesla refused to sign a CBA. It snowballed fast as other unions started supporting Tesla workers. Dock workers refused to unload the cars at Swedish ports. Denmark, Norway, Finland, they joined the blockade. And they stopped delivering Tesla license plates. Electricians would not service Tesla chargers. And cleaners stopped cleaning the showrooms. Tesla routed around all of it. Now, they imported cars through Germany and then trucked them to Sweden. Then they went to court to get plates directly rather than through the port. Elon Musk called the Swedish model insane, and the company never budged. The union didn't lose a vote or run out of money. Tesla simply paid its way out. According to the union, again, the union is IF Metall, Tesla bought out all of its remaining striking members one by one until there was no one left on the picket line to represent. So, what really happened here? And why did it happen? Because initially the sales plummeted, not because of the union. It was because of Elon Musk's political beliefs, especially what he did in the United States and around the world. Let's be honest about that, because the initial sales dropped. People said, I don't like this guy. I'm not going to buy his car. That happened, but it didn't continue. So the union's leverage argument was kind of shaky. It could not dent Tesla's sales at the height. And by the time the sales did fall, a bigger force was doing the work. The union picked a fight on principle that Tesla should follow the Swedish model just like everyone else. And Tesla answered with a checkbook. That's exactly what happened. The bigger question now is whether this emboldens Tesla to take the same posture in Germany, because the unions are pretty strong in Germany. This is quite a story. And I'll tell you, Elon Musk, as you know, is worth a whole lot of money, the richest man in the entire world. So he bought his way out of this one. Want to talk about the latest crop of union busters. Once again, this is a courtesy of our friend Bob Funk at the Labor Lab. Simplot out of Idaho hired Concordia Resolve Consulting for $3,500 a day. That election is still open. Cisco Raleigh in North Carolina hired the Cummings Group. We don't know exactly where that election is. Turner Construction. I know the trades work a lot with Turner Construction, but this is out of Alabama, of course, right to work state. They hired Road Warrior Productions at a cost of $3,800 a day. Road Warrior was also hired by the Blue Chip Casino in Indiana for $3,900 a day. That election was won. Didn't work out. In the media, big company here, Nexstar Media in Connecticut. They hired LRI Consulting for $425 an hour. That election was lost, but in D.C., Nexstar also hired LRI Consulting for $425 an hour, and that election was won. So once again, thank you, Mr. Bob Funk and the group over at Labor Lab. That's the latest rundown of union busters in America. There are many. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the importance of peer-to-peer talks and resources available to men in the trades on Trades Day here on America's Workforce. Don't go away.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LiUNA to build North America's infrastructure. From roads and bridges to schools and skyscrapers, the men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, build the projects we depend on. From constructing the Freedom Tower on the site of the former World Trade Center to untangling Washington, D.C.'s congested interstate, LiUNA members do the work that matters. Find out what it takes to be built by LiUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is presented by the Laborers International Union of North America. Feel the power right now at liuna.org. Founded in 1887, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters represents the employees responsible for tirelessly constructing and maintaining the national rail system in America. For more than a century, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees has proven they have what it takes to protect its members and meet the ever-changing challenges of the rail industry. Today, the BMWED continues to fight for job security, fair wages, better benefits, and safer, more modern work environments. For more information, please visit bmwe.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Steelworkers. You can find more at usw.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org. This segment of the show is brought to you by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For more information, please visit bmwe.org. Blue Cross and Blue Shield companies formed out of a need to provide affordable health care to teachers, to loggers and miners. Back in 1965, the Blues developed the National Labor Office to strengthen its commitment to organized labor. Blue Cross Blue Shield's National Labor Office remains focused on America's workers, advocating for affordable and equitable health care, partnering with strategic alliances to provide industry-leading products and services, and proudly serving more than 18 million unionized workers, retirees, and their families, all working hard for America's working families, for the health of America. You can learn more by following them at Blue Labor on LinkedIn and X, formerly known as Twitter.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. I'll tell you, I knew we were going to talk to this guy again. We had so much fun last time he was on the podcast. I'm talking about Bill McCamley. Bill is the director of the New Mexico Building Trades Wellness Coalition. And the website you want to go to is nmbtwellness.org. And this is part of our ongoing series we call Labor 132. From now, we started this actually on August 3rd, all the way up to 9/11 of all days. Every day, we're going to take a look back in labor history, find out how we got here. Bill McCamley, how did we get here? Let's start off right there, brother. Go ahead.
Well, I was instructed to give you one of my labor stories. So I will start with that. When I was in the state legislature in New Mexico as a member of the House of Representatives, we were in the minority for 2 years in 2015 and 2016. The Republicans had won in 2014. And one of their big pushes was to remove Little Davis-Bacon, which would take away a lot of the wage wins that labor had gotten over time. And one of the things I was so proud of was helping to lead the fight against that initiative that those guys had. We did a 3-hour debate when it hit the floor of the House, which is the maximum you can do. And I was one of the guys chosen to kind of get up and talk about how this was a bad idea. And I was thinking, what can I do? Because we had a bunch of our guys up in the gallery watching. So I read the lyrics of a Dropkick Murphys song called Workers' Song. And I read out the entire song. I'm a terrible singer, but I read the whole thing out. And it's about how the workers are the ones that do all the work. They're the first people that get screwed over, even though they're the ones building your bridges, fixing your water mains, teaching your classes, all this kind of stuff. And it was one of the proudest moments of my life to that point because it just felt so good. And all the guys were cheering up in the gallery. And though it passed that day, when we were so good at fighting it that when it got to the Senate, it didn't get through. And because of that work, New Mexico still has those worker protections, and our guys are still making a decent chunk of change for every hour they put in. That's one of my proudest pro-labor moments.
Well, you know what? You got to do what it takes. And sometimes you got to get a little creative. And obviously you got a lot creative on that one. How long did your speech go when you kept on,
Oh, God, I must have gone half an hour or 40 minutes but I get wound up about these things, and sometimes that's a problem. But in this case, it was actually a good thing.
Yeah. I guess that was your version of a filibuster in a way, right?
Oh, yeah. And we had rules where you could only do 3 hours at a time, but I definitely had my contribution to the 3-hour limit. And it was one of the best, proudest things I ever did to help folks out because Hey, look, man, the whole thing we had is you work a fair day, you should get a fair day's wage. That's it. It's not complicated, and we should make that happen.
So, Bill, this sounds like your version of a filibuster over there in New Mexico. Am I correct in going down that path?
Absolutely. We couldn't go more than 3 hours, but we wanted to take every single minute we could to remind people why it was so damn important that a fair day's work gets a fair day's wage. And taking that away, it doesn't make communities better. It makes them worse. Making sure our workers understand that they have value and the stuff they do is worthwhile to all of us is one of the most important things we can do. And it's something I took seriously when I was in politics and still taking seriously now.
Yeah, yeah, and you should. More people need to take that seriously. You know what bothers me, and I'm sure it bothers you, how much you have to fight just to talk about fair wages. You know, there's a history here. I came across this story I have to share with you. The Federal Society of Journeyman Cordwainers, okay? They were founded in 1794, and they are recognized as the first formal labor union in the country. They were established in Philadelphia in 1794 to represent leather workers and cobblers, marking the first organized effort by skilled tradesmen to collectively advocate for their interests in the country. Well, this should not be a surprise to you because they face significant legal challenges, most notably in 1806 during the Philadelphia Cordwainers case, where members were charged with criminal conspiracy for demanding higher wages. Despite the guilty verdict, this union laid the groundwork for future labor movements and highlighted the need for legal protections for workers' collective action. So, okay, cut to the chase here. They were found guilty of asking for higher wages. And we're going back. I mean, this is right after the Declaration of Independence. I mean, think about the history here. And it's a long history, and that's why we do this. That's why we call this Labor 132. We got to take a look at what happened. We got to salute the Cordwainers, okay? Because they raised their voices because they needed more money, and they were found guilty for that. Okay, you're a longtime labor guy. What do you say to that, Bill?
I think we need to celebrate all those folks because it's been a struggle. And I will add one thing. I was the New Mexico Secretary of Labor for a while. And one of the things that came up that was real important for the folks that I was responsible for was how do we enforce the laws on the books? Because you can pass all the laws you want, but if employers still try to get around those laws and cut wages to save a buck on their end, then workers are still getting screwed. And that process is called wage theft. And it is a very underlooked but massive problem in the United States. And the reason is when one person is screwed out of a couple of grand a year because they're not paid what they're legally required to get, it doesn't look that bad individually. But number one, a couple of grand for a worker is a lot of freaking money. You know, if you're a billionaire, you're Elon Musk, you're throwing $100 million in this next election, $2,000 is pocket change. But to some guy who's struggling to pay the rent, who's saving for their kids' education, wants to put food on the table, that's a lot of money. The second problem is if it happens over and over and over again, the numbers get big. Now, this is, I just looked this up. There was a 2017 study that showed for just minimum wage violations, there were 2.4 million workers that had lost over $8 billion annually, like 3,300 per year. And it's like 17% of low wage workers. And so we need to not only, when our politicians get up and talk about things that they're doing, talk about the law, but are we putting in the resources to enforce the law so that the workers get what they are legally required to get and that they need to put food on the table?
Boy, you make a great point here because there are some laws, and we need better labor law. Let's be honest about that. But the laws that are on the books, well, they're not being enforced. And you bring up things like OSHA, and I have stories from OSHA all the time. You know, somebody dies on the job, and Maybe it's $30,000, $40,000, something like that. It's ridiculous. And there's a history of that going back. I mean, I remember I come from a steelworker family, and I did a lot of research on the Steelworkers Union. Look at Homestead, what they went through back in the 1890s, when we were trying to get Labor Day going on. And, when somebody died on the job, they got like $75. The family got $75. Obviously, things were cheaper back then, but that's a slap in the face. And let's just continue with this conversation, because it's all about money. You bring up Elon Musk. You talk about these people that have so much money. I mean, it's almost, it's the best labor law money can buy, which isn't very much right now. And there's no teeth into it. I was wondering if you could speak to that. I mean, you're a longtime union guy here on behalf of the United Association. You're dealing with this. Wage theft is going on. Misclassification of workers is going on as we speak. And the penalties, they're few and far between. Okay, we know the problems. What needs to be done here? I mean, you spoke out in the legislature in New Mexico.
Yeah.
What's the course of action here for labor?
So, Flash, it's interesting when you look historically at these issues. Back in the late 1800s, you had a situation where these very, very powerful people became so powerful, they were basically the only ones in their field. So you look at Vanderbilt, who was the railroad guy who owned all the railroads, and he started Vanderbilt University. They're called the Commodores because he was like the admiral of the middle of the country, because he was the only one that owned all of the railway stations. You look at JP Morgan and all the banking, and you still have that today. You had Rockefeller and Carnegie. I think it was Carnegie Steel and Carnegie Hall in New York. Rockefeller had all the oil, Standard Oil, and it was Rockefeller Center in New York. So these guys became so powerful that they were the only ones to control their stuff. And so what Teddy Roosevelt was able to do when he got to be president was he was called a trust buster. And he put in all these laws that we're still theoretically using today that allowed for the government to say, look, if you're going to keep merging and merging and merging, and you've seen these issues come out in the media with the airlines, all of these different places where is there enough competition to make capitalism work? Because if you have a trust, if you have a monopoly, and that board game monopoly, the whole point is to put everybody else out of business. So you're the only one that has all the real estate, and so you can charge whatever the hell you want. And so how do we get away from that? Because if we don't have competition, then capitalism does not work because you have one guy controlling everything. And we were able to get away from that over about 50 years. You had, it started with Teddy Roosevelt, who really put some of these things in. And then through FDR in the 30s and 40s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was able to put more worker protections in, institute things like the minimum wage, and make sure that there were systematic protections. Well, we were able to get those things, but now we're on the other end of, society kind of moves in cycles. And now we are in a cycle. There's actually some arguments out there that guys like Zuckerberg, Bezos, Elon Musk are actually more powerful than the Rockefellers and the JP Morgans and the Vanderbilts and all those guys. And here at the end of the day is what I worry about. The need for these guys to make more and more money because that's the only goal in life. I worry about that as the sole driver for how our economy works. I wrote about this in my book, actually. There was a reporter who went and interviewed Rockefeller late in life. I think he was in the 20s, and he was an old guy, but he was one of the probably top 10 or 20 wealthiest people in the country. And he said, look, man, you've got all this money. You've done all these things. When is it enough? How much more do you need to make? And his answer was, well, just a little bit more. Okay. But I worry about that moving forward. And you see this today. So many of these young men don't trust the system. And 96% of our guys in the construction trades are fellas. And they don't trust the system because they don't see the system working for them. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. But I think this is one of those reasons. Why do I feel like I'm continually getting screwed when there's rules that are supposed to be in place that should allow everyone in this country to work hard, make a living, move forward are in place. This is the first generation in probably 100, 200 years where the children of those folks in the 80s are not as well off as their parents were. You have a whole generation of young men that are saying, the system's just going to screw me, so I'm just pulling out. Right now, right now, there are 40 million men out of the workforce. I don't mean on unemployment. When you're on unemployment, you're actually looking for a job. These guys are just out of the workforce. Now, some of those folks are retired and some of them are students, but that middle level is the highest number of young men we have ever seen in this country that are sitting on the couch, playing video games, not even looking for work. And I think that's a real problem because part of that is they don't trust that a system that is supposed to be in place to give them a fair shot is doing its job. And I think part of that is these guys keep making more and more money above me, and all the rules are in their favor. And so, again, not only do we have to create laws that help even the playing field a little bit, but we've got to enforce those laws in ways that let contractors do well, businesses do well. We want to make that happen, but also provide a basement level of protection so that people feel there's a point at getting into the workforce.
Yeah. I think the term, what you're talking about here, is shared prosperity. If you're working hard and your boss or the company you're working for is making a lot of money, you should benefit from that. I mean, that's what it's all about. Bill, I got to take a quick break here. I love this conversation. This is part of our series we call 132. 132 years ago, Labor Day was created. The year was 1894. We'll continue with Bill right after this on America's Workforce. Don't go away.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LiUNA to power North America with affordable energy. The men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, have the skills needed to build and maintain oil, natural gas, nuclear, solar, and wind projects that are shaping America's energy future. From new energy tech to retrofitted facilities, LiUNA members do it all. Find out what it takes to be powered by LiUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce Radio is sponsored in part by the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, District Council 6, representing painters, glazers, drywall finishers, and sign and display industry workers. They remind you that belonging to a union is your right as an American.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Ironworkers. You can find more at ironworkers.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
America's Workforce is sponsored in part by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, LLC. Find out more about our investment solutions tailored to meet the needs of Taft-Hartley funds at boydwatterson.com.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, where you can find more at teamster.org. The Ironworkers Great Lakes District Council, consisting of 8 ironworker local unions in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. We build the skylines and bridges along the Great Lakes. With more work than ever before, the Great Lakes District Council is actively searching out the next great ironworker, whether it's building the next Intel plant or constructing a bridge to safely connect our great cities along the lake. So join the Ironworkers Great Lakes District Council today. Find out how and learn more about the council by visiting iwdistrictcouncil.com.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. Always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. Our featured guest today is Bill McCamley, who is the director of the New Mexico Building Trades Wellness Coalition. We talked with Bill recently about the importance of member assistance in the trades. He comes from the United Association, been doing a great job. But today we're focusing on labor history, and he's got a great history. I love what you did in the legislature some years ago. And I want to pick up on the theme. You mentioned some big names here, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. The way they are portrayed in history, you know this, Bill, they're on a pedestal. Look what Rockefeller did. Look what Carnegie did. I mean, these were powerful businessmen. And what's important, especially for this show, we get a lot of downloads. We've been doing this for a couple of years now. A lot of people don't realize, how we got here. And it was the struggle by workers against those Carnegie. Look at the Homestead situation. Carnegie was a creep. He sent goons out. People were shot, killed. Mother Jones, look what she had to put up with for the miners. But, the companies, and this is what bothers me. It's got to bother you as well. The way history portrays them. And it's almost like the worker is the enemy. I mean, I don't know if we could ever change that, but I welcome your thoughts on it.
I worry a lot about the quote unquote masculine value of needing to conquer someone to have value for ourselves. I have this book that just came out. It's called Right My Dudes Now What? How to Be a Man in the 21st Century Without Being a Dick. And there's a whole chapter called Conquest versus Competition. And that's where we talked about that quote with Rockefeller, where when is it enough? And he's like, it's never enough. I mean, his whole point of saying just a little bit more was that my whole life is about making so much myself. There's never any, hey, how do we build the community? And don't get me wrong, I love competition. I played soccer for the last 20 years. I'm a goalkeeper. I love how that makes me better when I'm playing against someone else. When I see the other goalie do well, I think I want to be better. When I screw up, I can internalize what I did and get better. And we as men, in a lot of cases, we need competition. I need competition. I'm probably done playing soccer. I'm 48 years old. Throwing yourself on the ground when you're my age is really fun at the time. And then the 3 days afterwards, you're in pain. But I decided to start boxing training again. And I went for my first session in like 2 years this morning. And I am exhausted. But it was good. And it was a way for me to get better with this trainer here in Austin that I use. This guy, Tiger Lord, he's amazing. But he's constantly challenging me to do better through competition. But there's a difference between that and having to have someone under your boot to define yourself. And that's what I really worry about with some of these folks that get so much money. It's, again, like the Rockefeller quote, it's never enough. I've got to have more and more and more. And the thing is, I wonder how many of those guys are actually happy. But the consequence is if I need to get more and more, I'm not working to create a greater pie for everybody sometimes. I really like some business examples. Costco, they make a real effort to say, like the old Jim Hightower quote, we all do better when we all do better. And I do think, hopefully, we are starting to have a realization in this country now that without the people that make these things happen, we don't grow as a community. Without the guys out there putting up the electric lines, we don't have the power necessary for those data centers that are being put into place. Without the nurses that are working in the hospitals and pulling, shifts that are crazy to make sure people are taken care of, we don't have the infrastructure we need for our bodies to be better. And I think we do need to have a reevaluation a little bit in this country about the value of work, because without the workers, even with the new AI and robots, people need to fix the 3D printers. They need to program those robot forklifts in those facilities. We need people to be able to do these things. We don't have robots yet that can still do the type of welding that my guys in the UA do. We don't have the robots yet that can do the electrical work safely and at quality level that the IBEW guys do. We need these skilled workers that add value to society to be there for us to build better lives for everyone. And that requires us to be able to set rules so that they can make a fair wage. You know, I do all this mental health work in New Mexico, and I'm literally in Texas right now because I just started the Texas Building Trades Health Foundation. I'm on my 3rd day of my contract out here. I'm going to be doing both. And what I talk about all the time, because I teach this Vital Cog suicide prevention class, why are the suicides and the death by overdose so high in the construction trades? And one of the reasons is it is a hard bleeping job on your body. And that pain adds up over time. And that leads to a couple things. Number one, physical pain leads to problems with your upstairs, and it's harder for you to deal with other things in your life, and it leads you to get on that cycle towards suicide. And physical pain gets you to self-medicate. You know, if I take 4 or 5 shots of Jameson, which is my drink of choice, then I feel better initially, and then I don't feel better. Or I go into the doc and he's passing out the OxyContin because it feels better, it works. But when my injury heals, I'm off the Oxy, and I don't want to be off the Oxy. So what do? I go out and get on the heroin and get on the fentanyl. The last year we have data, 11,000 of our guys in the construction trades in the last year died by overdose. It is the top killer of construction workers in the country. As I talked to you on the show before, between death by overdose and death by suicide, you're 16 times more likely to die from those things than you are from regular workplace accident. But so much of this, Flash, I think comes down to the fellas in society in those working trade levels not feeling like they're valued. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, we got to let these guys know your work matters. It is important to all of us in our community. We don't have schools without you. We don't have roads without you. We don't have airports without you. We don't have energy infrastructure without you. And we need to let you know how just valuable you are to all of us. And I think that's all of our jobs.
Yeah. You mentioned in the earlier segment about so many young men just sitting at home playing video games. What was it like? You said 40 million or something like that?
Yeah. So 40 million men in this country now are out of the job force. It's the highest we've ever had. And that's a problem, because if fellas are not feeling like they're valued, they're going to withdraw. And if they withdraw from society and they just sit at home and don't do anything, it creates all sorts of other problems.
Oh, yeah.
They're radicalized online, and they have health issues, and it leads to a lot of these mental health issues. You know, Flash, the number one cause of death to men in America under the age of 45 is ourselves, through suicide, drug overdose, and risky behavior like driving 150 miles an hour on the road. That's the number one cause of death. And I think we have to realize that and understand that one of those reasons is guys need to feel like we mean something. We need to be part of a team that contributes to something. We want to be folks that solve things. We want to be part of the solution. But if we don't feel that the system is in place to get us to be part of the solution in a fair way, a lot of us are withdrawing, man. And that's a problem.
Yeah. So, Bill, with what you just said, how can we get this population into the trades? You know, there's a lot of openings right now, but I don't know if they're scared to go into the trades because of what you just said. What's your answer to that? How do we move them? We call this the pathway to the middle class. Obviously, there's some good jobs in the trades right now, well over 6 figures when you take a look at various parts of America. The UA, let's start right there. What do you think?
Well, I talked to our guys at Local 412 about this because we have a very low dropout rate from our apprentice classes at Local 412. Unfortunately, that is not reflected across the trades as a whole. Apprentices across the country have this massive dropout rate. It's anywhere between 40 and 60% when you look at the numbers. So I'd say there's a couple things we can start with. Number one, a lot of the organized labor groups need to get back into organizing and recruiting. And I'm seeing that. For a while, I think we got away from that, where it was, we got all the guys, we just need to protect our guys. I think we're starting to see a refocus from a lot of the business managers and organizers on out there that organizing is important, recruiting is important, because these young men want to be in a union. They want to have a place that they feel they've got brothers and sisters around them. Again, part of a team, as a person adding value. But when they get in as an apprentice, we got to support them. One of the things that means, Flash, and I'll be straight up honest with you, some of these JATC instructors, and I hear this from my guys in other places, they still have that old school mentality of, this is the way I was brought up. We're going to run you through the thing, and we're going to talk all this stuff to you. And a lot of young people just don't want to deal with it, so they drop out. So we need to figure out how we get away from that a little bit. We need to be tough. We need to make sure people are learning what the issue is and get in. But I think being a little more supportive rather than that old school drill instructor mentality, I think that's something we can do internally. Now, I also think there are things that governments can do. And one of the things I just presented to the Legislative Education Study Committee in New Mexico a couple weeks ago about this research I'm doing on young men. And there were two things that we were asking for. Number one, how do we get more male teachers into the schools? 76% of public school teachers are women, and boys do better at the middle school level and up when they have some men around as mentors, because they feel like there's someone that they can identify with, and their grades go up in general. They perform better. They don't act out as much, those sorts of things. The other thing we asked for was to triple the amount of money the state puts into pre-apprenticeship programs. Because when you look at that dropout rate from apprentice programs, one of the data-driven things we found that increases the amount of retention is if you've gone through a quality pre-apprentice program. Now, why is that? Number one, if I'm sitting at home, playing video games, maybe working Subway 20 hours a week, and I get into a trades apprenticeship program, that's hard. I'm working 40 hours a week at a physically demanding job, and I'm going to class 2 nights a week. And that shift is really, it's a big cliff to come up. If you can add a little bit of an easier ramp on through a pre-apprenticeship class, that really helps. Plus, you get some of your OSHA training done. You understand what you're going into better. And so if we work those kids and older people, if they take it through that pre-apprentice program, and then they get into the trades, that's one of the things that governments can do. And then they can also say, how can we get you services to keep you in these apprentice positions? Childcare, transportation. Do you need a little help with your equipment? Those are the sorts of things that I think government agencies can look to do. And it's the same kind of program you get at college levels. You can get grants to go to higher education institutions and get help with books and computers. We should be able to make those programs available for things like utility belts, hard hats, steel-toed boots, all the stuff that guys need to be able to stay in these classes. And I think if we can do those two things internally and get our government partners to help out with, that'll help those folks that do get into the trades stay in and keep going. Because if you finish an apprenticeship in the building trades, 96% of those folks stay in the trades for the rest of their lives. And that's a good thing.
And that's something no one can take away from you. Once you learn that trade, it's yours for life. I love that. Boy, you did a great job today. We're talking about labor history, talking about mental health, talking about organizing. I'll tell you, you're a great guy. You're going to be a regular here on America's Workforce. You really fit into this show. I appreciate it. I'm going to drive people to 2 websites. Obviously, Bill comes from the North Mexico Building Trades Wellness Coalition. He serves as director. That website is nmbtwellness.org. You also might want to check out his personal website, billmccamley.net. billmccamley.net. Always a pleasure. Love your energy. Love your input. You stay safe and stay in touch. Okay, my brother?
Thanks, Flash.
And that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Tomorrow, we check in with the American Legion and the Alliance for Retired Americans. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.